Wow. Okay. So, like, have you ever seen a single news story just completely take over the internet? I mean, today was definitely one of those days. If you're even remotely interested in superheroes, you already know what I'm talking about.
It's been inescapable.
It really has. The big reveal finally dropped. We got the full cast list for Avengers Doomsday coming at us in May 2026.
Yeah. It seems like everyone is talking about it, and I think what's important to consider is that this is not just your average sequel announcement. This is something much bigger.
Mm.
Looking at these articles from AT News, The Hollywood Reporter, and Variety, it's clear that this is like a massive undertaking.
Absolute. This is huge. So for this deep dive, we're going to really focus on this incredible cast reveal, right? We'll break down which familiar faces are coming back, who's new to the MCU, and maybe even some familiar faces, but in new roles. We're going to really dig into what this might mean for the future of the MCU, but we won't go too crazy with it. We'll just give you the most important stuff.
Okay.
So first things first.
Yeah, if we zoom out a little bit for you, Avengers Doomsday is a really big deal. Think back to Avengers Endgame in 2019. I mean, that was a cultural phenomenon. And since then, Marvel has been figuring out what to do next. And according to these articles, there is a lot of excitement for this film to, recapture that buzz and box office success.
Yeah. That's an understatement. It feels like everyone's been waiting with bated breath to see how they would even attempt to follow up something like Endgame. And the first piece of that puzzle, well, I guess the biggest piece is the cast. Now we've got a solid group of like MCU veterans returning. So the biggest names in the franchise. We're talking Chris Hemsworth is back as Thor.
Right.
Anthony Mackie is Captain America again. And we've got Sebastian Stan returning as Bucky Barnes, the Winter Soldier.
And don't forget Paul Rudd. Paul Rudd is coming back as Ant-Man, who, always adds that really unique blend of humor and heart to these big ensemble films. Plus, we've got Tom Hiddleston confirmed to be back as Loki, which is always, well, Loki's always going to stir things up.
Yeah, you never know what you're going to get with him. We're also seeing some of the newer heroes returning. Letitia Wright as Shuri.
Yep.
Simu Liu as Shang-Chi. And Tenoch Mejia as Namor. Also, Winston Duke will be there as M'Baku, and Florence Pugh continues her role as Yelena Belova, and of course David Harbour as Red Guardian, and Wyatt Russell as the, well, maybe not so heroic U.S. agent.
What's interesting here, if we connect this back to some of the recent MCU stuff, is that we're seeing a lot of characters who have been part of that Thunderbolts storyline. So for anyone who's not familiar with them, the Thunderbolts are basically a team of anti-heroes and sometimes even like straight up reformed villains. We've got Hannah John Kamen coming back as Ghost from that part of the MCU. And then there's this listing for, it just says Bob. I don't know if this is a code name or if that's actually the character's name.
Right, like just Bob?
Yeah, played by Louis Pullman. And of course, we've got Danny Ramirez back as Falcon. So you've got like this really strong, familiar foundation of heroes and, well, let's just say morally flexible individuals.
Yeah. Okay, so now for the real shocker. This is what everyone's been buzzing about, right? It's not just about the familiar MCU faces. We're seeing a huge, like a seismic shift. They're bringing in some really well-known characters from, well, a totally different superhero movie universe.
Yeah.
The original X-Men.
Yeah, this is a big deal. It really could change the whole MCU. And all of these articles really emphasize that. So we have Patrick Stewart returning as Professor X. Now, you got to remember, he's been playing this role since those early 2000s X-Men films from Fox. And even with his recent MCU appearance, this continued involvement is like a major statement. I think what's really interesting for the audience to consider is how their established histories, the baggage they bring, is going to affect the current MCU.
Right.
Will their timelines line up? Will their motivations be the same? This isn't just fan service. This could totally change how we understand the past and present of the MCU.
Absolutely. And right alongside him, the one and only Ian McKellen as Magneto.
I mean, come on.
Come on. Talk about an iconic performance. He was so good in those original X-Men movies. To see these two together again, especially in the MCU, this is going to be a moment.
Absolutely. And it doesn't stop there. Kelsey Grammer is also on the list, back as Beast. Do you remember when he first showed up in X-Men The Last Stand? And then he popped up in the Marvels. Maybe that was a hint of things to come.
Foreshadowing.
Maybe. And Rebecca Romijn is back as Mystique. She was such a memorable part of that original trilogy. And we can't forget James Marsden returning as Cyclops, who's another key character from those early films.
Yeah.
Oh, and Alan Cumming is back as Nightcrawler. His, really acrobatic performance in X2, X-Men United was amazing. Variety even mentioned his recent comments about X2 being the gayest film he's ever worked on.
Oh, wow.
Just a fun fact. It's fascinating because bringing in the original X-Men cast really makes you think about timelines and the whole multiverse thing.
Yeah, for sure. And speaking of other corners of the Marvel Universe, Avengers Doomsday is connecting to another big franchise, the Fantastic Four. The main cast from the upcoming Fantastic Four, First Steps, is joining the party.
This is a really smart move. It connects these two, massive properties right away. So we've got Vanessa Kirby, who is playing Sue Storm, the Invisible Woman, in Doomsday. And she's joined by Pedro Pascal as the super genius Reed Richards, Mr. Fantastic.
Perfect casting.
Right.
And to round out the Fantastic Four, we have Eben Moss-Bachrach as the Thing.
Ben Grimm.
And Joseph Quinn is playing Johnny Storm, the Human Torch. So it looks like the Fantastic Four aren't getting a standalone intro. They're jumping straight into the main MCU.
Yeah. It shows you that Marvel wants everything connected, but the surprises just keep on coming, right?
Another name that's got everyone talking is Channing Tatum as Gambit.
Oh, man, the Gambit saga. It's been a long time coming. Variety really does a great job of laying out his whole journey to finally play this character. That solo movie at Fox fell apart.
Yeah.
It looked like it might never happen.
Right. But then, of course, he finally shows up in Deadpool and Wolverine last year.
I know it.
And Variety quotes Tatum's social media posts about it. He was so excited. He said he thought he'd lost Gambit forever and how Ryan Reynolds really fought for him to get this chance. He even said he was, traumatized when the solo movie was canceled. This must feel so good for him. Yeah. He even said, I'm going to owe Ryan probably forever because Reynolds really went to bat for him. It's a really cool story about not giving up. And it's really awesome for all those fans who have been waiting to see him as Gambit.
Yeah, definitely. And speaking of surprising returns, nothing compares to this. Get ready for this one. Robert Downey Jr. is coming back to the MCU.
I know, right? But he's not Iron Man this time. He's back as the villain Dr. Doom. This is huge. And the Hollywood Reporter says this reveal was a really big moment at San Diego Comic-Con last summer.
This is a massive development. Downey was so important to the MCU in those early years, and it really felt like the end of an era when he left. The Hollywood Reporter says that Kevin Feige, the big boss at Marvel, convinced Downey to come back. And then Downey helped convince the Russo brothers to direct again after they also left after Endgame. I mean, that is a powerful trio right there.
It really is. Feige and the Russo brothers, they know how to make a hit. So with all these big names in the cast, who's missing?
Right. AP News actually points out some notable absences from that list of 27 names. The biggest one is probably Tom Holland's Spider-Man. And I think that probably comes down to the whole complicated situation with Sony and the movie rights.
Oh yeah, the Spider-Man rights are kind of messy, right?
Yeah, they're shared between Marvel Studios and Sony. And it often makes things really difficult when it comes to putting him in these big team-up movies.
Right, they have to find that balance.
Mm-hmm.
And even though Gambit from Deadpool and Wolverine is in Doomsday, neither Hugh Jackman's Wolverine nor Ryan Reynolds' Deadpool made the initial announcement.
And that's an important question, right? Is this the final cast list? The Hollywood Reporter seems to think that there might be more surprises coming. Maybe they're saving those big reveals for later.
Yeah, I mean, you can't call a movie Doomsday and have this many heroes without having almost everyone show up.
Right.
The Hollywood Reporter also had this really cool behind-the-scenes tidbit about how the Russo brothers actually wrangle such a huge cast.
This gives you a sense of the scale they're working with. They use what they call baseball cards with magnets.
Wait, what?
Yeah, it's pretty cool. Each card has a picture of one of the Marvel actors and their character, and they use these cards to keep track of everyone. They did the same thing with Infinity War and Endgame.
Wow. That's a lot of magnets.
Right. Joe Russo actually joked that it's the only way to keep track of all the characters they're working with. So yeah, this is a huge production.
I can only imagine that board. It must be like some kind of war room or something. So let's sum this up for you. Avengers Doomsday is going to be an absolutely massive crossover event. It's not just drawing from the main MCU timeline. It's bringing in characters from all these different Marvel movie universes.
The most surprising elements for me are the return of the original X-Men, which, like we talked about, opens up a ton of possibilities for the story. And Robert Downey Jr. coming back as Dr. Doom. I mean, that's just legendary. And of course, Channing Tatum finally getting to play Gambit. This is huge for a lot of people who have been waiting for this.
Totally. And it really does feel like Marvel's pulling out all the stops for this one, like they're trying to create another Endgame level event. And that brings us to a final thought for our listeners. With all these different movie universes coming together in the MCU, what does that mean for the future of these stories? What is the MCU now? And what kind of apocalyptic event would make it necessary to bring together all these heroes and villains? I mean, this really makes you think about all those multiverse theories and all those classic comic book stories, right?
Totally. It'll be amazing to see how they tie everything together and what kind of threat could possibly unite or maybe even divide this group. The future of the MCU is wide open. Who knows what could happen?
It's going to be wild.
It is.
Well, that's all the time we have for today. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me.